Update here. Off Craigslist, I got a Samsung TV for $50. It's an LCD. It was cheap because it has a problem with the remote and the buttons on the side panel. Looking online, it appears that these are probably Samsung known issues, that they have problems with the remote buttons not working. So I got the remote, and volume up and down works, and that's about it. I took the remote apart and cleaned it. That actually made the remote function better on my living room television set, which is also a Samsung. So I know the remote's working, but my living room Samsung remote does not work on this TV, nor does the remote that it came with. So things I cannot do are get into the menu. I can't change the aspect ratio, I can't change brightness, contrast, or anything. I'm not sure what to do about that. I might order a used IR sensor and try that. But for now, at least I've got it running. When I first got this TV, it would not sync. That was just the Naomi straight into the TV. I tried a PC into this TV first. PC was running, I think, 1024 by 768, and it looked fine. So I went ahead and mounted this TV up on the stand, plugged in the Naomi, and it would not boot. Or I mean, it booted, but it would not show a picture. So this is something I've read on the forums, that Naomi's sometimes have a problem with syncing up to LCD TVs. Some of them work, some of them don't. I haven't seen a list anybody's put together on which ones work, which ones don't, other than one post said Westinghouse tend not to work. Other people say they've just plugged them in and they usually work, so it's just kind of just random whether you get a TV that wants to sync up to it or not. I've heard it's the sync signal that is causing the problems. I've also heard that the voltage on the Naomi video output is 5 volts peak to peak, and most televisions are expecting about 1 volt peak to peak, which is what a PC puts out. So sometimes you can hook these up to a TV set and everything will be just super overpowered in the signal because it's putting out 5 volts and the TV only expects 1 volt. So in that case, I guess you could make an adapter to go on the end of your VGA cable with resistors that lowers the voltage that's coming out of it. But again, that wouldn't make it not display, I would think. I would think that that would just make it too bright, although some posts also say that it will fry the video circuitry if it's expecting only 1 volt peak to peak and you're feeding it 5. So really, it's not a lot of work, it seems, has been done trying to make a definitive document on what televisions work, what televisions don't, or what adapters can be made to make them work if they don't work. So what I did, other than get depressed when it didn't work when I first tried it, I looked online. I was trying to figure out what I could do to make it actually work, and one thing I found online were VGA to HDMI converters. Now I figured, if this TV doesn't like the native VGA signal coming out of the Naomi, perhaps if I feed that into a converter box, the converter will be okay with the signal, and then convert it to HDMI, which will display on the TV. And it turns out that that actually worked. You can see in this video, the converter I bought is a SIIG. VGA and audio to HDMI converter. The reason I bought this one was, number one, it was at a local electronics store, so I didn't have to order it. I just drove down there last night and got it. And number two, the power for the unit comes from an included power adapter. There are other VGA to HDMI converters that are powered by USB. So they're made specifically for laptops or computers, where you can plug the VGA into the computer, the USB into the computer to get the 5 volts needed to power the box. Since the Naomi doesn't have USB, it has a USB type connector on it for the I/O board, but that is not using USB protocols, so do not plug something into there that's USB just because it's a USB type connector and cable that the Naomi uses. So I wanted to make sure I got one that had an external power supply, so when I get this all enclosed in a cabinet or build whatever enclosure is going to hold the electronics, I don't have to hack something together to supply 5 volts to the converter by chopping off the USB connector that comes on it and wiring that out to a 5 volt source on the power supply. I just would rather have a separate power supply. The price on this converter was ridiculous. Crazy, in fact. It was $80. They have a good return policy. So once I discovered that it actually worked, I looked online, and Amazon has some that do the same thing, have a separate power supply, and are much cheaper. So I currently have ordered one that looks very similar to this one. It has the separate power supply, and it costs $16. There are posts on Amazon that say it works good for people who are using Dreamcast consoles connected to VGA adapters, and then the VGA adapter they plug into this VGA to HDMI converter box, and they say it works fine. So the Naomi is based on Dreamcast hardware, so I am going to hope that the $16 box that I get works as good or better than this $80 box, and then I'll return this $80 box. The next step up in this cabinet is to wire up the sensors to track the guns around the outside of the monitor. Of course, I have 2 ways I can do that. The first way I can do that is to actually make a border that goes around the TV out of MDF and mount them on there, which is what I would like to do for the final solution. But for the temporary solution of getting them around the monitor and making sure that everything works in 16:9, just in case I can't get this TV into 4:3, is to do what I've done before when testing light gun games of this type, is use blue painter's tape to actually hold the sensors on the monitor. And it actually works, even if you don't have them perfectly lined up. I've got a video on my channel quite a while ago of a Sega Lindbergh that uses the same system. And I used it in my living room television, and I just used blue painter's tape to hold the sensors in place, and it worked fine as a test. So that's probably the next thing I'm going to do, is put those sensors around and then test my guns out. And the previous video where I did a test, it seemed like the guns were working but acting a bit odd. So I can run through the calibration and all that stuff once I have the sensors around the monitor and make sure it works in this 16:9 resolution, which actually doesn't look bad. I mean, looking at it, I'm one of those people that's highly susceptible to watching 4:3 content on television when it's stretched to 16:9. It really bothers me. I have to say it doesn't look bad at all watching this game. Maybe that's because it's, you know, an anime computer game as opposed to watching television where you're watching real life, you know, cars and people, and your brain just has that that picture in it of how they should look, and you know you're seeing them all stretched wide and flattened in height, whereas this is more just animation. But whatever the reason, I don't think it looks bad in 16 by 9 at all. So if I can't get this to 4 by 3, and if the gun sensors work in 16 by 9, I'm thinking I'll be fine with that. So I think that's all I've got to say today. It is progress. It is an actual screen with video from the Naomi, and that's makes me happy. So stay tuned for the next video, which will probably be a bunch of sensors blue taped around the monitor and me waving the guns around trying to calibrate them and see if they work.